Fantastic. Right, well, we've kept listeners waiting long enough now, Pritesh, so let's dive into this. So this idea of all hands up cold calling, it's blown my mind, this, and I don't know if I'm fully on board, but I'm intrigued. So let's set the scene with this. So I'm gonna quote from, again, one of your blog posts here. So this is what you say. I disagree with the way lots of teachers do cold calling. I hate the idea of no hands up. In fact, at my school, we've pretty much banned no hands up or hands down questioning. Now, this blew my mind, right? Because lots of schools have done the exact opposite, right? They've banned hands up questioning. And for listeners who aren't aware here, what I'll say in inverted commas, traditional cold calling will be students will be sat there with their hands down. The teacher will ask a question, they'll pause, and then they'll say the name of the student that they want to answer the question. So why are we not a fan of this, Pritesh?
Not a fan at all. It's just, I mean, the way I describe it in the blog is you just the easiest way, you compare two classrooms. You go into one classroom and the teacher asks a question and no one puts their hand up and the teacher says, I'm going to pick this student. And then the student says something like, oh, this is the answer. And the teacher says, well done. And then you go into another classroom and the same a different teacher, different classroom, asks the same question and suddenly you see 32 hands flying up in the air. And some of them are like waving their hand, kind of thinking, I want to be picked, I want to be picked. And the teacher says, ooh, 100% of hands up, we're loving this team, how exciting, let me pick Craig. And then everyone else puts their hands down, because they want to listen to what Craig has to say. And then Craig says his answer. And I think I don't know, when I put it that way, in my head, I'm like, which classroom would I rather be in? I would much rather be in the second classroom where there's palpable energy in the room when the teacher asks the question. There's so many benefits. I mean, first of all, it's visible. You can see the energy in the room. And so it's just a more exciting classroom to be in. So number one reason, I want to be in a more exciting classroom. Number two, when you have all hands up, like I said before, it reveals to you who is not actually with you in the lesson. And I think as a teacher, the best teachers that I've seen, they know at any moment in the lesson exactly who's with them. And by with them, I mean paying attention, listening to what the teacher's saying, thinking about what the teacher's directing them to think about. And I think with the hands up, it's much easier to spot. Now, obviously, you get some I always get this the wrong way around, false positives. So you get students who put their hands up who have no idea what's been going on in the lesson. They're just pretending to put their hand up. Fine. If that happens, when you pick them, you'll find out. But the students who just weren't paying attention or were paying attention are choosing not to participate will have their hands down. And suddenly you can see them. And that's really great data that you'd be missing out on if you had simply asked for no hands up. So it's a visible gauge. And the stronger that culture is of hands up when you know the answer, the more powerful this becomes and the power of the technique grows, because in the first instance, it reveals who isn't paying attention or who can't be bothered to participate. As I said at the start, you can then have conversations with those students. You can then find out why, and you might help solve some quite significant problems that those students might be having. It might reveal something about the culture of your classroom. Again, like we talked about, the culture of error, and you have that data, you can then act upon it and do something about it. But the other thing is that for some students who maybe aren't used to participating or listening as much, because the culture of, like I said, the majority drags them along in a positive way, they suddenly are participating more. It reinforces the idea of paying attention, because when everyone's hands are going up and you weren't listening, then the next time around you think, oh my gosh, it's so obvious I'm not listening because my hand's not up now. I want to listen to the next thing. So again, it's a positive cycle. It helps. If you're the kind of student that perhaps wasn't paying attention initially, the next time a question is asked, it's going to be more likely that you're paying attention, because you know that the fact that your hand is up is making you stand out. And so that's, again, really important way of helping to motivate students to engage. In contrast, if hands are down, those are all the benefits that you lose out on. You don't know who's not participating for what reason. You don't necessarily know if students are paying attention. I guess the counter argument to this is if you use mini whiteboards, then would that achieve the same thing? But again, I would argue that mini whiteboards is a form of 100% participation, where instead of all hands going up, you're saying all boards are to be shown. By the way, as a caveat, I'm not the biggest fan of mini whiteboards in the world, so maybe that's something we can come to later on. I think in maths, I'm a big fan. In science, I'm less of a fan. But we can talk about that later if you want. But I think hands up is just very speedy, and so you can get more questions. You can get more bang for your buck with hands up.
Oh yeah. Well,
In some ways.
just to touch upon that as well. Yeah, I'm a massive mini whiteboard fan, but I agree. I would still cold call fairly regularly because it's quicker. It's more suited to when if you want kids to give longer verbal reasoning and so on and so forth. So I'm on board with this, but I need to dig it more into this hands up, Pritesh. Right. So strap yourself in here. Let's try and get to the bottom of this. Just in terms of the mechanics. Look, because obviously, we'll just call traditional cold call for me would be the hands down, and all hands up is your kind of version of this. Traditional cold call has lots of kind of subtleties to it, like things like obviously not saying the name first, so asking the question first and saying the name last to make sure all kids are thinking. Make sure you leave enough wait time between question and then calling upon a person to answer. Are all the mechanics of all hands up cold call essentially the same as traditional cold call in terms of the active ingredients that make it work, aside from is the only difference that all hands are going up? Would that be fair to say? Or are there any other subtleties in there?
I think that's the only difference. I think there's two things that might be different. Number one is when I say all hands up cold calling, the expectation is all hands go up. It depends on the nature of the question that you're asking. And so we'll come to that later, kind of the difference between checks for listening, rehearsal, and checks for understanding. So the expectation of the number of hands up will vary depending on the nature of the question. And then I guess the second difference is the narration of the hands. So if I am asking a simple question that I want every hand to be up for, um, especially when you're in the stages of building the culture of hands up, you would be narrating that loads. So whereas in traditional cold calling, you'd say, right, I don't want any hands up for these next questions, and then you'd go and do your questioning. Here I'd be like, right, I want to see every hand up. Right, this question, boom. Come on, I've got 80% of hands, 90% of hands. There we go, 100% of hands. We might say, oh, waiting for one more person, or were they not paying attention? Um, the narration will differ. But apart from that, it's exactly the same. And then you pick the student after all hands have gone up. And you'd pick in the same way as you would during a cold call, because there's of course from the teacher's perspective, there's no difference between all hands being up or down in a sense of who you're going to pick, because you're equally likely to pick anybody.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Next thing, just again to get into the kind of subtleties of this. One of the things that I think kids do a lot with cold calling, traditional cold calling, is they'll gamble. So they'll think, right, there's 30 kids in this class. What are the chances Sir or Miss picking me? I'm just going to not think about the answer. If they do pick me, all right, maybe I'll do my thinking there and then, or maybe I can just get away with saying I don't know or whatever. So whilst in theory, cold calls should get all kids thinking, there's no guarantee because you're only getting data from one or two children at most per question. Whereas something like mini whiteboards or call and respond or voting systems or whatever, at least you're getting data from everybody. Now, I would assume all hands up has the same potential problem. And I think you alluded to this before, that if kids learn that if they keep their hands down, and we'll get into who you actually question, whether it's hands down or hands up students a little bit later. But if kids learn that if they keep their hands down, you're going to be asking them, why don't you know, or whatever. I'm guessing kids will also, the same kind of kids will gamble as well and just pop their hand up and just cross the fingers and hope that they don't ask you, you don't ask them. Would this be something that kind of plays out, Pritesh?
It's a really good question. I think that there's other strategies you're using that kind of prevent that from happening or minimize the amount that that's happening. So one of those strategies is, again, it depends. So if I'm checking to see whether someone's listening, then there's two things that mean that students that increasing the likelihood that students are listening. Number one, it is the randomness of who's being picked, which, as you say, is the same with all hands down cold calling. But the other thing is the frequency of the questioning. because in my lesson, I mean, I haven't actually done a tally, but I would predict if I was to watch back a lesson that I record, I would ask anywhere between maybe 60 and 100, 120
Wow.
questions in a lesson. So the chances that a child goes through an entire lesson without being picked on at least once or twice, maybe even three times, is quite unusual. And therefore, the the likelihood that they are then paying attention increases with, and if that's happening constantly throughout all the lessons. So I think frequency of questionings is my kind of safeguard against that lower engagement. And then the second safeguard against that is not necessarily for checks for listening, but for more where I want them to rehearse their ideas, or I want to ask a check for understanding and just make sure everyone's kind of grasped the idea well using turn and talk. So everyone has an opportunity to practice speaking before putting their hands up. And that just means that forces thinking as well, because you have to talk to your partner. If I see students aren't talking to each other, then there's going to that's I'll have to address that in the lesson, and I'll notice that in the lesson. Or if only one of them is speaking, again, we can talk a bit about that, about the mechanics of turn and talk. But I would say that that's one of the most powerful strategies I use to ensure, again, that I have 100% as well.
Lovely that. Right. I'm interested in the different scenarios here, Pritesh. So I'll paint. I think I've got three written down that I'm particularly interested in. And what I'm interested in here is, what you do as a teacher as in response to this. So let's imagine you've asked a question, and all hands go up apart from a minority of kids, 2 kids, 3 kids, or whatever. What are you doing in that scenario? Who are you calling upon to answer?
Okay, so first thing, it will depend on the question. So again, if it's a check for understanding where it's a tricky one, I want to see who gets it.
Mm.
I don't mind if not everyone has their hand up, because a student might generally not know, and you're not going to put your hand up if you have no idea what the answer is, or you're not really sure what the answer is. And in that, if it's only 2 or 3 kids that don't have their hand up, then I, I would already have a sense of who those kids might be. And if it was different to what I expected, then I would make a mental note. So if I'm expecting uh, someone who's perhaps who finds this particular topic just tricky, or signs a bit more tricky, and they're one of the weakest students in the class, then I might not be that surprised if the hand isn't up for that tricky question. If it's someone who I wasn't expecting, then I might kind of make a mental note and then check in with them later about that. Um, then if it was a check for listening, I would that I wouldn't allow them to not have their hand up. Like that for me is, there's something wrong there, something that needs to be addressed. So in the moment, I might just start off by saying, right, I need to see 100% of hands, and 95% of the time that solves the problem. The hands would then go up, because that's the culture in the classroom, that's the culture in our school. Every hand goes up at Arc Zone Academy. That's just the expectation for those kinds of questions. Um, if I said that and it still didn't go up, I might look at that student, and let's say it was you, Craig. I'll say, Craig, I'm still waiting for you. I need to see that hand up. And then hopefully you put your hand up. And if that still didn't happen, then I guess I don't know what I would do, because I'm not sure that happens. Uh, I think you would. It depends. If it was a genuinely really easy check for listening, um, I might then just pick that student anyway, with
Mm.
who doesn't have their hand up, and ask them to answer. And if they weren't able to answer, that would show me that they weren't paying attention. And then I might give them a demerit, which is basically like a little warning for them. Because, and again, some people listening to that might think, oh my goodness, a demerit for not listening to, some sort of scientific content. And I think that that's really important, and I'm very unapologetic about it, because if my student isn't paying attention in my lesson, they are not learning, and that means that I'm letting them down in that moment by if I let them get away with not listening in my lesson, I'm basically saying to that student, it's okay, don't worry, you don't have to participate in my lesson, you don't have to listen to my lesson, that's fine. But it's not fine, because they're not going to succeed then. They're not going to succeed in my lesson, they're not going to succeed in that subject. That needs to be fixed, that needs to be addressed. So I think yeah, that's what I would do in that situation.
That's great. And don't worry about offending listeners. When Danny Quinn was on, we had NSPCC contacted and all sorts. So, yeah, don't you worry about
Oh,
that.
wow.
We'll be fine. I just want to give you two other scenarios. And again, I'm very aware that your response will be different if it's a check for listening versus a check for understanding. And I'm also aware that we might want to not dig into some of the check for understanding strategies until a little bit later on. But if you can just paint us a bit of a
Yeah.
picture, Pritesh, that'd be great. So I'm interested if you ask a question and half the hands go up and half the hands stay down. What would be your kind of response there if it's check for listening or check for understanding?
If it's check for listening and only half the hands go up, that probably tells me that my explanation wasn't good enough or I wasn't clear enough. Um, because I'm confident that there is a culture in my classroom where everyone is listening, and I normally get 100% of hands up. So I know that my baseline is that 100% of hands do go up. So when they don't, it must be something I assume that I've done wrong. And so I would just say, okay, hands down, I'm going to explain that again, and take them through it more slowly, or say the key word again, or whatever it
And
might be
that's
that,
such
that needs
useful
repeating.
information, right? As a teacher, that's something
Yeah.
that, I mean, I've done this in the past. I give an explanation that I think is an award-winning explanation, and then it turns out 10 minutes later, no one has a bloody clue what's going on. But because I haven't got that info in the moment, I've no idea if that's, so it's so useful, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's why the high frequency of questioning is so important because I've done the same thing where you're just loving your life giving your explanation, and you've talked for ages, and then you've just not realized that 10 seconds into your explanation you've already lost them with an idea that they'd forgotten or something, and yeah, and so that's why the high frequency is so important as
And
well.
if it was a check for understanding, again, without going too deep into this, and you got 50-50, just to give listeners a bit of a teaser for what might come later, what would be your response there?
Share with your partners, go. And then suddenly, hopefully, you'd have. And then after that, I would expect 100% of hands up because even if they have no idea, they've said some what they think perhaps might be the answer. I would want everyone to just share what they said, and that's what I would say. I'd say, what did you say to your partner? Not what's the correct answer when you put your hands up.
Perfect. And final scenario, again, for both a check for listening and check for understanding, if only just get one or two hands going up and the vast majority are down, what are you doing there?
Then I've really done something wrong, haven't I? uh, then I would definitely re-explain because something's gone wrong.
And if for a check for understanding, are you still doing the kind of turn and talk there?
No, because if only two of them think they know, then that's not enough for a tenant. Because then half the class, or in fact, 90% of kids would turn to each other and stare blankly at each other. And that does happen,
Yeah.
and it's hilarious when that happens. Because you just sometimes, in the moment, I'm like, right, tell your partners, this question, go. And then you just hear it. What you normally hear is that, bzzz, everyone's talking, there's a buzz, everyone starts talking straight away because you've set them up for success with that question. And sometimes you say, tell your partners, go with lots of energy, and there's just silence for like a second, 2 seconds, and the kids straight away know as well that, that something's gone wrong because no one knows the answer, and they need to say, right, back to me, right, let me explain that one again. So it's quite funny when that happens.
That's good. That's good. Right, just a bit more on this all hands up, because I could talk to you for hours on this one. So one of the arguments in favour of cold call versus the kind of classic hands up where a teacher asks a question, a keen kid just sticks their hand up and the teacher just chooses that keen kid straight away, is that those keen, confident, high achieving students, they dominate the lesson and nobody else kind of gets a word in. Um, how do you stop that happening with hands up? Is that a potential kind of lethal mutation of this this, for want of a better phrase, the quicker kids are the first ones to get their hands up and everyone else feels a little bit kind of intimidated and overwhelmed? Is it worth kind of giving a bit of wait time before you ask kids to put their hand up, or any strategies like that? Does it ever happen that kids dominate in the way that they might do otherwise and it kind of puts other kids off, or is that not a problem?
There are certainly kids who might be quicker to put their hands up or will try and demand the attention of the teacher more. So whilst I said at the start, like a hand waving, it can be nice, but I do discourage it generally because it is kind of like demanding attention and saying, pick me, pick me. Um, I don't think that I don't think that there's a, a certain kids dominate with all hands up. I think that the easiest way to prevent that is, again, this ties in with a different strategy. This seems to be my answer for everything you asked me. Um, and one thing that we do massively at ArcZone is we go big on the praise. And it always surprises me when I hear of schools that just use minimal praise, or they'd say we don't give merits out just like that. We only give it for something that's like extra special beyond expectations. But or like we don't do stickers, we don't like extrinsic motivation, and I completely disagree with that. In fact, I think that that's yeah. I disagree with it as much as much as I disagree with hands down cold calling. um, it's so important to heap on the praise for everything that happens in your classroom, because first of all, everyone loves praise, right? Everybody loves to be praised. Um, it's so motivating, uh, and it's more fun for you, for the kids, and the kids love it, and it works. They get so motivated. So every when hands go up, sometimes if there's a really straight arm up, I'll be like, oh, straight away, merit for you, Josh. That's such a straight arm, loving that. It doesn't cost me anything, but suddenly everyone else's hands goes straighter. Why would you not use that? I just don't understand. It works, and even with older kids, it works really well. They love it. I remember last year my 11s loved stickers more than any other year group that I taught. Um, so praise is really important there. And so one thing that we do is I will have a seating plan in front of me, like a fresh copy of a seating plan, and every time a student answers a question correctly, or uh, they contribute in some way, I add a tally on their name, which tells me they've got one merit, and I'll say, "Oh, merit for you, wonderful answer." Um, and then let's say I'm like 15 questions into my lesson, I can have my clipboard in my hand, and I can pick someone who hasn't yet got a tally next to their name, and that way I can ensure that, I mean, normally in a lesson, nearly everyone will get a merit, at least one merit, and then like some of the students will have two merits or three merits. Um, and so because I'm giving so many merits and I'm making a record of that, and it's really easy with a seating plan because you don't have to find their name anywhere. You just literally do a tally next on the name as you pick the student, or once they've answered, you give them a tally. It means you have a visual, you literally have a visual in front of you of how many questions, essentially, it's a rough number of questions you've asked and who's answered them. And so that can be, again, a way of ensuring that you cover the whole class, and you say, oh, Craig hasn't got a merit yet. Let's go to Craig. And even if he hasn't got his hand up, be like, hold on, Craig. Well, why isn't your hand up? Well, it will be up because there's a culture of hands up. And you say, great, you're ready to be picked. Here you go. This is your turn to shine.
That's good. That was going to be my next question, just the logistics of the merits and demerits. Would it be the same for demerits as well? It would just get a little tally on the seating plan.
Yeah, everyone does their own thing. I just write DM next to their name, under their name, and there's a tally. There's like each name on the seating plan is a little box. There's enough space to do all the tallying and writing the DM. Yeah,
Got it.
next to it.
Got it. Right. Few more on this. All hands up. I can't stop asking you about this. So I would imagine, like me, there'll be listeners here thinking, I'd quite like to give this a go. What I like immediately about it is that it's just one tweak to traditional cold calling, right? It doesn't sound like you need to do a million things different. You can kind of build this into your existing practice. So, how long would you? I know it's a terrible question. How long would it take to establish? Like, can you get kids doing this pretty quickly?
Yeah, it's interesting because at ArcZone, it wasn't universally a thing when I joined, and I really wanted it to become a thing. And so I have a tricky one of my tricky classes is a year 8 class, and sometimes participation varies quite a lot in there. So I kind of had this moment where I was like, right, we need to get all their hands up, and I just said it to them. I said, right, team, I really want to push this lesson. What I want to do is I'm going to ask you lots of questions, and it's all going to be questions that you can answer, because I'm going to ask you lots of easy questions because I just want to see if you're listening. I want to see who's getting the hands up the fastest, whose hand up is the strongest, but I expect to see every single hand up. And I explain to them just very quickly why that's so important. Because I want to see that you're listening. I want to make sure you're succeeding in my lesson. So let's practice now. So when I ask you a question, I want to see, let's just see what it looks like. Who's got the straightest arm? Hands up, everyone. And you can just see straight away, are they with you? Are they not with you? Are they buying into this idea? And again, that's where your praise comes in, your merits come in, and you reinforce, you stamp those good behaviors, and you say, all right, let's give it a go. I wonder who's going to get the hand up for every single one of these questions I'm going to ask. I'll be really impressed if you get your hand up for all of them. Again, you're just those kinds of narrations, like who's going to impress me, who's going to get merit, or when I tell your form tutor later who's really impressed me, whose names am I going to be saying? Whatever you can do, whatever you know motivates your class, use that as your initial levers, and then you try asking a few questions. You say, "Oh, love it! I've got 100% of hands up. That was so speedy." But I tell you what, my S7s were even faster. The next question, let's see if we can get our hands up even quicker. Beat my. I don't think you'll be able to do it, but let's see. Let's give it a go. Just any sense of competition they love. So you're pulling all the levers that you can that's going to motivate them, and then you give it a go and you see what happens. And if it falls completely flat and nothing happens, that's when you know, okay, there's something different that needs to happen here. But at least you know now that there's an issue with participation. There's an issue with it might be the way you're narrating and setting up the buy-in from those kids. It might be a school culture that needs addressing. And if I struggled then with that class, I would then go and speak to my line manager and say, oh, I've tried this and I thought this would happen, but this didn't happen. Can you help me identify why they're not putting their hands up? Why are they not with me in the way that I want them to be? Because I think it's that I love this idea of are they with you? Because at the end of the day, you as their teacher, your class has to be with you if you want them to succeed, right? They have to be listening to you, paying attention to you. If you say, I want to see an extra page of homework from all of you tonight, and they all do it, great, they're all with you. And if no one does it, oh, what can you do to get them there? And if the more that you can be sure that they're going to listen to you, the more confident you are that you'll be able to take them kind of through the whatever goal you're trying to achieve with that class. And I think the participation is the most fundamental of those things that you want. It's like a litmus test for how much the class are with you, because participation they can do in the moment, they can be rewarded in the moment. It's visible for everyone to see, and it's easy to do in a sense that I'm going to ask you an easy question. Okay, this is called the stamen. What is this called? Like, if you're not answering that, like there's literally nothing more you can do to set them up to succeed there. Whereas if you say to them, right, who's going to complete an extra exam for homework and hand it to me next week, that's a huge barrier.
Yeah.
Like that's not going to happen, is it? So if you want that to be able to happen when it comes to crunch time, to GCSE exams, you want them doing extension work every week for you, at the very minimum, before that, you need them to put their hands up when you want. And so I think I've forgotten what the original question was. I don't know why I'm talking
No,
about
it's
this
good.
anymore.
No, it's good.
Um,
It's good, Pritesh. And you've kind of alluded to just one other thing I wanted to touch upon here. Um, would there be any class you wouldn't do this with? And I'll just kind of tell you the kind of thing I'm thinking here. So you can imagine a super keen year 7. They're going to be loving this, right? September. This is the way we do things here. They're absolutely loving it. I'm then thinking of a tricky year 10 class. Perhaps they're not fans of science or maths in my case. Can we bring it in with those guys as well? Is there any way you'd say, no, I'm not doing it with this? Or is it for everybody?
I think you have to try it and see. I think you shouldn't assume that it's not going to work. Like I said, with my example of the booklets in my previous school, I was so shocked at how successful it was as a strategy. Where like some of the naughtiest, the kids whose behavior would, if you were to walk into any lesson, would be pretty poor, was they were so engaged, and it just the right conditions could surprise you with and the right narration and the right strategies can really surprise you with what students are capable of doing and how much they're capable of engaging with content. But it's about pulling all the levers, like I said. So like, it sounds like it's one strategy all ends up cold calling, but you heard in kind of my narration what I was doing there is I was appealing to their sense of competition. I was creating competition with my year 7 class and my year 8 class. I was appealing to to my relationship with them. Who's going to impress me with the most number with the straightest arm up? I was relying on the merit system and the demerit system. I was thinking about when I tell your form tutor later, I'm relying on my knowledge of their relationship with their form tutor or the head of year. There's so many factors there to think about, and you just got to, as a teacher, if you're in a school where perhaps you want to try this on your own, in your own classroom, you need to, I guess, I would suggest that you interrogate all the things, all the levers. How well do you know that class? Um, because the more of those levers you pull, the more likely it is that you'll see that strategy succeed. And if it doesn't succeed, then that's still really useful because you want. I I would think that this is something that people want to go away and implement because it does all the things that I've explained, and it's very revealing of a lot of the problems that might be going on in your classroom that you may or may not yet be aware of. Um, so if you want to go ahead and try it, then I think it's whatever the outcome, it will give you something useful. And if it doesn't work, then great. Have a really productive conversation with your school, whether that's your line manager or colleagues or coach or whoever it is, mentor, and then go from there. But I think it's a good starting. I think anyway, it's a good starting point.
Right.